Hi, I'm Michelle Bourke and I'm an author, and I'm here today to tell you my story. But before I start, I'd like to introduce you to a travelling companion of mine, and you'll get to know our story throughout this talk. So let me introduce you to Cardboard Paul. And I can assure you that travelling around the world with a cardboard cutout of my late husband, Paul, is never boring. But before I let you know about that story, and there's plenty of those stories, let's go back to the beginning of how I became somewhat of a world famous celebrity travelling around the world with a cardboard cutout of my late husband. So it all began in 2008 when Paul had a rash on his neck, and for weeks I kept nagging him, go to the doctor, go and have it checked out. And he said, oh no, I'll be right. And I said, no, go and get it checked out. It doesn't look too good. And like most males, I think, I'm probably generalising there, but most males tend to not take care too good of their health and tend to just let it go. Unlike females who tend to look after themselves probably a little bit more and start nagging their partners and husbands saying, go on, you got to go to the doctor. But he went to the doctor and he zapped it with some dry ice, and a couple of days later it turned black. So he ended up going back to the doctor and he said to Paul, it doesn't look too good, but we'll take a biopsy. So they took a biopsy, and then a week later we called into the doctor's office with wanting results, and he said, doesn't look good, Paul, and his face said it all, I can tell you. And he said, it's a melanoma. Well, I just burst into tears, and Paul just sat there in shock. So then the next stage is we ended up going to Peter MacCallum the next day and running into the professor of the clinic, and he said, what can I do for you? And he said, look, you know, we've been just diagnosed with melanoma and we need to see somebody. He said, come this way and just wait here and we'll get to you as soon as possible. So they took him in, did some more biopsies, and then came back with the results a couple of weeks later and said, look, it is a melanoma, we need to do further surgery. So then they had to excavate, as I think it's 5 centimetres, and they took a big chunk out of his neck. So sewed him up, sent him home, and life went back to normal. But in 2010, which was about 2 years later, he found a lump in his throat. And whilst he was at the Peter MacCallum clinic doing one of his checkups, which happen every 3 to 6 months, they said, come with me, we'll go next door to the lymphoma clinic. And he was diagnosed with a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So they removed the lymphoma, and then he had to have 15 rounds of radiation. So then life went on again. And then back in 2014, we went on our holiday up to Port Douglas, beautiful up there, and went and rested and enjoyed ourselves and went out to the Great Barrier Reef, and he was complaining about a backache. So I said to him, look, you know, I'll get you a heat pack or something or other, and so I got something for him, and he stunk like menthol all the way home on the plane. So we got home, and then we went to the doctor, and the doctor said, oh, I'm not quite sure what it is, and it could be this, could be that, could be kidneys, need to get x-rays. So this went on for months. And on the side, Paul had Crohn's disease, which is an inflammation of the bowel. And so he had test after test after test. So in the end, Christmas of 2014, he was admitted to hospital. They did an MRI and they found a tumour in the middle of his back, which was in the T8, 9, 10, 11 area, the thoracic area. So they did some surgery, debulked it, and then on Christmas Eve, the family were there just with Paul, and the oncologist came in from Peter MacCallum and said, look, sorry Paul, but you've got a melanoma in the spine. So Paul had to go through rehabilitation. There was some radiation through that period, and he came home, and then for months he was going okay. He learned how to walk again because he couldn't walk because he was paralysed down his right side actually, and so he was paralysed, and then he had to learn to walk again. And once he got up walking again in the June of 2015, the pain came back and he had further surgery. Then 2 months after that, he had further surgery. He had another 2 spinal operations. By then he was in wheelchair bound, and he had radiation, he had immune therapy, he had trial therapies of whatever we could do for his melanoma. And so he had 5 spinal surgeries in that 12-month period, and he had a spinal leaking on top of that as well. So then in the December of 2015, he had a brain leak, because we knew he had a tumour on the brain as well from all these tests, because he was having forever MRIs and PET scans. So he had, we ended up back in St Vincent's private, and because it was during the New Year period, because it was on New Year's Eve of all times, the doctor, his specialist came in, his neurosurgeon came in and said, look, Paul, you know, we'll see how we're going. If you go into a coma, we'll operate immediately. So he was okay over that 4 or 5 days, and then early January, I think it was about the 5th or 6th of January, when they all sort of came back after the Christmas leave, he had surgery, brain surgery. And I was very worried. Called the family in and said, look, you know, we don't know whether he'll make it. So after that surgery, he had more radiation and then more PET scans, and they found that it was just spreading like wildfire, this cancer. He had a rare melanoma, and it was called KIT, K-I-T, and only 2% of white Caucasians get this. So he was one of the very unlucky ones to get this melanoma. So in the January of 2016, he was told that he was terminal. He only had months to live. So I said to him, what do you want to do for whatever time we've got left together? And he said, I don't know, what will we do? And I said, look, let's have a family gathering. Our daughter was turning 21 in the April. His mother was turning 90, and we were having our 25th wedding anniversary. So then we celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary by renewing our vows, which was a lovely special occasion with our family around. By then he was in a lot of pain. He actually was put on a morphine drive, and I gave up my full-time employment to care for him. So on the 20th of May in 2016, Paul passed away at home, surrounded by myself and his 4 children. But leading up to his death, we had many, many conversations about life, what was going to happen. We talked about death. So I prepared Paul for death, and Paul prepared me for life. So one day he was lying in bed, and I was just standing beside the bed, and he said, Michelle, darling, what are you going to do when I'm gone? And immediately I said, I'm going to travel. I'm going to travel to all the places we had planned. For many years we wanted to go to Paris, London, Europe. And I said, I'm going to travel. But what I'm going to do is get a photo of you, put you in my suitcase, and I'm going to go travelling. And he said, you're not, are you? I said, yeah, I'm going to do it. He says, you're not. I said, yeah, I'm going to do it. So after he passed away, I received a, like on Facebook, we received, you know, advertising or whatever, and they said, come and see if you can write a book, or if you want to write a book. And this was write a book in 48 hours. So I did the half-day workshop, because I can assure you, I am not a writer. I'm not a professional writer. I haven't written. I was always good at putting some letters together or emails. I did a bit of poetry when I was, you know, in my teenage years at school, but I've never written, really, and I've never written a book. So I did this workshop, and as soon as I got there, I knew exactly what I was going to write about. And I got the name of the book straight away. And that's how Conversations with Paul was created. So this was my first book, Conversations with Paul. I started writing that 2 weeks after Paul had passed away. It took me a few months to write, and I was very fortunate because what I was doing with this book is writing posts on Facebook and updating people about his journey from the very start. So I'd had all those notes, and I quite like writing notes about, as I write, doing it. So then what had happened is in the November of 2016, when I went on my retreat to our writer's retreat, I'd finished the book. So on the Monday of after the retreat, I pressed the send button to a publisher, which was Busy Bird Publishing, to publish my book. So in 2017, in the March, I launched my book, which was extremely exciting. It was just an amazing time. And then that year in 2017, I thought, I want to travel. And I was a huge, big, well, I still am a huge, big Paul McCartney fan. And I know he's not getting any younger. And I didn't think he was coming out to Australia. So I found some tickets to go and see him live in concert in New York. So I had 1 ticket for the New Jersey concert and 1 ticket for the Madison Square Gardens concert. So then I had to find a travel agent. And by chance, I ran into a travel manager at one of our meetups that I was going to on and off during those couple of years after Paul had passed away. And then when I booked all my travel, I spoke to my cousin, Peter, and I said, Peter, I'm going to New York and I need a photo of Paul. What am I going to do? And I said, I'm thinking of having a banner, which is like these banners behind him. I'm thinking they're just too huge and cumbersome. What can I do? And he said, why don't you try cardboard, Michelle? I said, what a brilliant idea. So I Googled it, as we always use Google, and I found a company in Werribee that produced customized cardboard cutouts. And this is where Cardboard Paul was born. Now this is the second version of him, but this is Paul on our wedding day, because I didn't have any photos of him by himself, and this was the only one I could find. So what I did was we packed him up. He folds in 3. He's got his own bag. I put him in my suitcase and I travelled. So we travelled, I flew into Los Angeles, and then I did a 16-day California tour of 46 people on the bus, and it was a guided tour, and I had the best time. And travelling by myself for the first time really ever overseas was a scary experience, but also just a rewarding, wonderful experience. And I met some really, really amazing people. So from California or LA, we did, Vegas, we did the Grand Canyon. Paul was photographed at the Grand Canyon. We did San Francisco. So Paul's been all around the world. And so we went to San Francisco and back to LA. And then from LA, I said farewell to my rest of my tour buddies, and I headed to New York to see Paul McCartney in concert. And that was a surreal experience, standing in Times Square, looking at the, the Empire State Building. And if you get a copy of the book or you read the book, you will read about the funny story in the Empire State Building where Paul, or Cardboard Paul, became a security risk. But I'll leave that for you to read. So then we went from New York down to Texas. So I flew into Houston, and this was just after Hurricane Harvey had hit Houston, and they were devastated a lot of that area. So when I was in Vegas, I was getting a bit concerned. So I was ringing up my travel manager and just saying, Elisa, what's going on? What's happening? So then from there, I travelled from Texas in Houston, and I went and saw NASA, and I hung around with all the cardboard cutouts at NASA, but I didn't take cardboard Paul with me, which was hilarious. So we went from Houston to San Antonio to Austin to Waco, and then to Dallas, and then from Dallas I flew into Paris. And then I got lost in Paris, and I actually literally got lost in Paris. But when I was in the gardens, I turned around and I saw the Eiffel Tower, and I just burst into tears. And here I was in the city of love with a cardboard cutout of my late husband. But then from Paris, I went by train to London, and I picked up a 20-day tour of London, Wales, Scotland and Ireland, and absolutely loved it. So on the way we took plenty of photos, which I've got a couple of photos here, and so I'm hoping you can see it. So that's Paul and I at top of the rocks in New York, and you can see the Empire State Building on the side there. And then we went up to Inverness. So that's Paul and I, I'm hoping you can see it, Inverness, and which is the Inverness Castle. And then of course London, and the most famous place in all of London is Buckingham Palace. And I'm sorry about the glare, but I'm hoping you'll be able to see it. And then my most favourite place, oh, we did Route 66, which we did the California one, so I'm just going to get this photo out. That one, Route 66. And then my most favourite place in London was Stonehenge. And if anybody's been to Stonehenge, I cannot explain the amazing experience and feeling I felt at Stonehenge. There was just complete nothingness. And that's us at Stonehenge. I'm hoping you can see that. But a bit of a glare there. But anyway. So that was our trip, our first trip in 2017. And from that trip, I wrote the book, Travelling with Cardboard Paul. And that tells the story of all the funny things that happened to us, all the funny things that happened to me, being called up on stage in Bunratty Park or Castle in Limerick, I think it was Limerick, to do an Irish jig. So it was a life-changing experience for me. So from doing Travelling with Cardboard Paul, we've continued to travel. So it was 2017, and this tells the story about that. And also in 2018, my tour buddy from the Californian trip, Pauline and I, went to Phuket for 10 days. We sat on the beach. I had Cardboard Paul with me. I got some weird, strange looks. But while I was at Phuket, I wrote this book. So whilst I was travelling with Cardboard Paul on this trip, I was taking notes. So that's a handy trick for people who really want to write and you get the idea, just put it down on paper. And I was keeping a diary, sort of a journal come diary of where we were going. I also had with our tours, the guides or the tour guides or the itinerary from the companies. So I was able to use that too in reliving this book. So it's an amazing story. So in 2019, just last year, I went again, because in the May 2019, last year, I launched this book and my story went viral. As I told you earlier on, I sort of became a little bit of a celebrity overseas. So this story got picked up and I was on Sunrise, I was on the Herald Sun newspaper, we're on 3AW, and also when I did the trip in August last year, I was then asked to go to Ireland for a week. But whilst I was in Scotland, because we did Paris and London and Scotland, because I went back to all the places I really wanted to spend more time in. So in Scotland, I was on the Irish, not the Irish Times, the Sun UK Times. I've been in the Life magazines, both in UK and in Australia. So my stories are around, and if you wanted to find out more, my website, michellebourke.com.au, and that's Bourke, has some clippings, has got photos, and it also sells both books. So if you're interested in buying any of the books, feel free. But when I went back to Dublin, I was invited onto the Ray D'Arcy show, and it was such a surreal moment where I sat on the couch in front of a live audience with this man, this cardboard cutout of Paul, and we just told their story. So I hope you enjoyed this little talk, and if you want further information, as I said, there's the michellebourke.com.au website. Books are available through my website or on any of online books, you know, Amazon, Kindle, those type of things. It's an ebook or both books. But for anyone who's interested in writing, I can assure you, if I can write, anyone can. And I write true stories. So now I'm on to my third book, although I co-wrote another book, We Inspire, Live Your Truth. And because with this story, I was keeping a promise to my lovely late husband, making sure that I travelled with him in photo form. But I am writing my third full book called Death, Dying and Beyond. And that just talks about, you know, preparing for death and dying. It's a bit probably not necessarily morbid, but also tells the stories about people that I have met on my travels, and sort of telling their stories too about how they've lost their loved ones. So I'm really looking forward to finishing that book. I've also recently written a screenplay called A Love Like No Other, and I have sent that off to it's like a competition. I've submitted it to Impact Australia, and I'm hoping to get a call very shortly, and maybe you might see us on screen. So thank you for listening. Really appreciate you following us and hearing our story. And I wish you all well, especially through these trying times. And good luck with it all. Thank you. I'm Michelle Bourke.